evening and welcome to another episode of Vantage Point here on MTV Sports. Now, it's come to our final episode of the year, but don't worry, we'll see you again next year. Welcoming you on the day after Christmas, so hope everyone at home had a good Christmas. As usual, I have with me Dr. Dayan, Jayatilleka, former diplomat. Good evening, sir. Hope you had a good Christmas too.
Yeah, fine. And this is for the holiday season. It's not because I've come from the UNP convention.
Well, if you had, you would have folded your sleeves up.
Oh, absolutely. Roll up your sleeves, hit the street.
Well, Doctor, we started off this program, I remember, nearly 6 months ago, and we spoke about the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, we spoke about land powers, we spoke about police powers, and we spoke about all of these topics mainly because of the TNA and also because of the Northern Provincial Council election. The elections were held and the TNA is now in power in the Northern Province. How do you see the progress of the TNA since the date of assuming power in the Northern Provincial Council so far?
Well, I think that there's something strange, maybe even dangerous, happening backstage. Backstage from the Northern Provincial Council leadership and the TNA leadership. I say this because Justice Vigneswaran, the Chief Minister, made some very strange remarks on an official occasion. That is the presentation of his first budget on the 10th of December. In that budget speech, mind you, he made some extraordinary political statements. He said that the 13th Amendment is insufficient. Now, mind you, that's different from saying that the government has not devolved the powers that it should under the 13th Amendment. So, the 13th Amendment is not sufficient. The present Provincial Council cannot be an agency of change for the Tamil people. This is something else he said. The role of the governor under the 13th Amendment is wrong and dysfunctional. Now, it's not as if he were limiting his criticism to Governor Chandrasuri. He's talking about the role of the government in the 13th Amendment. And he went on, Justice Vigneswaran, Chief Minister Vigneswaran went on to say that all previous governments have intended to heap calumny and humiliation on the Tamil people. All previous governments, that's been their intention. He also uses the term genocide, that the policies of previous government have bordered on genocide, if not been genocide itself. Now, for a very senior judge, this is extraordinary. It's also a little ironic because during the time that successive governments were bordering on genocide, Justice Vigneswaran was making his way up in the higher judiciary in Sri Lanka, thanks to those quasi-genocidal governments. Now, his bottom line in his budget speech was that the time has now come for an international strategy to ascertain the wishes of those Tamil people who continue to occupy their traditional homelands of the north and east. In other words, a plebiscite, a referendum under international auspices, only of the Tamil people in those areas. Now, this is a very, very serious and very dangerous thing to say. I think it is because Chief Minister Vigneswaran and the TNA, the Northern Provincial Council, find itself subject to certain pressures from behind the scenes. Those pressures come mainly from the Elamist or secessionist networks in the powerful Tamil diaspora. It also comes from a reading or misreading by Tamil politicians of the importance of Tamil Nadu, what might happen, and therefore the options open for Tamil politics. There is a compulsion, almost a temptation to escalate things, to push the envelope in the direction of an exit almost. I mean, when you call for an international strategy to ascertain the wishes of the Tamil people living in the north and east, you are talking about a referendum on whether or not they should remain part of Sri Lanka. I think that things are headed in a dangerous direction. I don't think that Chief Minister Vigneswaran, Mr. Sambandhan, Mr. Sumandaran are capable of hitting the brakes all the time. They may be losing control, and the center of gravity of Tamil politics and strategizing may be shifting to easily identifiable networks and caucuses within the Tamil diaspora. It's moving out. The government of Sri Lanka has to be very smart, and it has to do something, and I don't mean set the tanks rolling. I mean it has to act in a very pragmatic
It should
and very
set the think
realistic
tanks rolling.
Brilliant. But I don't think we have many. We have many more tanks than we have think tanks.
So Doctor, you were saying this dangerous sort of path that the Northern Provincial Council is heading towards. But is this something you're making based on what just C.V. Vigneswaran said in his budget speech?
No, Maina, no, it's not just that. Mr. Vigneswaran and Mr. Sambandhan had told Mr. Akashi, who visited recently, that they would give the government 3 more months to seriously address the Tamil issues, and if the government fails to do so, they would then resort to a non-violent campaign of agitation. Now, that's not a very helpful or prudent thing to say. In fact, Mr. Akashi said on the record that he had advised the TNA to be patient. He had said that's not the way to go. So it's not just what Chief Minister Vigneswaran said in his budget speech, it's also what the TNA told Mr. Akashi. It's also Mr. Sridharan's speech in Parliament where he praised the late Mr. Velupelli Prabhakaran as a great hero. So it's a number of things. There's a dangerous radicalization that is taking place.
Who could put the brakes on this, you think?
Well,
or what can put the brakes on this?
The lesson of the life of President Mandela, one of the main lessons, certainly after he won, was the constant dialogue. The dialogue he had with his opponent. Now, I think that is the lesson that we have to draw. It's not the truth and reconciliation aspect that's been talked about. That's not the relevance of South Africa and Mandela. I think President Rajapaksa and Mr. Sambandhan and Mr. Vigneswaran have to sit down and be seen to be sitting down. And they must have a serious political discussion. They must meet often, continuously, within a time frame that they have decided on, and arrive at a solution. Now, the solution cannot exceed, at this present moment, the 13th Amendment. Even if one says that they should think of 13 plus, which I'm not really sure about. But it has to be about the implementation of the 13th Amendment. The full implementation, which does not necessarily mean the immediate implementation. Certain things can be held back, certain things can be implemented immediately. And as for those things that the government does not wish to implement, then the government must be willing to redivide the concurrent list where there are shared powers, and it can retain certain things and give more of those concurrent powers to the provincial council. Now, this can be done by only by a dialogue between the leaders of the government at the highest level and the leaders of the democratically elected leaders of the Tamil community.
And this was actually highlighted in a letter that was addressed by the Catholic Bishops' Conference, where Archbishop of Colombo, Cardinal, His Eminence Dr. Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, during a press conference also spoke about this very effectively. He was flanked by a number of bishops and high priests of the Archdiocese in Colombo. And in the letter that was sent, it was mentioned that the TNA and the government should engage in dialogue to reach a workable solution to the national issue. So this really is showing that the dialogue is very important and dialogue is necessary in all aspects. Another important topic that was mentioned in this letter was obviously the appointing of a civil governor, not a governor from a military background, to the northern province. And this was also another aspect that was touched upon by the TNA and by Mr. C.V. Vigneshwaran. They have been calling for a civilian governor to the northern province. Well,
I take Cardinal Ranjit quite seriously. When I served as a diplomat, it was my privilege to interact with ambassadors of the Vatican, of the Holy See, to the United Nations Human Rights Council, to UNESCO, and a separate ambassador to France, which is very important to the Vatican. And all of them who were senior clergymen, these were archbishops in some cases, they all had a very high opinion of Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit. He's relatively young, and he's already a cardinal, and he has worked closely with three popes: Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and now Pope Francis. He's got an enormous amount of experience, and the Catholic Church in Sri Lanka is the only institution that cuts across the Sinhala-Tamil divide. There are Sinhalese Catholics and there are Tamil Catholics. There are no Sinhalese Hindus and there are no Tamil Buddhists, maybe one or two. So what the institution says, I think, should be taken seriously, because they're able to see both the majority and minority side of the problem. Now, one of the things that the Cardinal said when presenting this pastoral letter, this was a 24-page letter. It's a serious communication. The earlier one was in 1984. Now, he said that there is a danger that Sri Lanka faces of foreign intervention. Now, Cardinal Ranjit and the Catholic Church in general are not given to sensationalist slogans. These are well-considered phrases, ideas, deliberated upon, and
they actually mentioned that at the press conference as well. They said these were dialogue. They discussed about this, and after much thought, that this letter was drafted.
So they warn against they warn about the danger of foreign intervention. They oppose foreign interference and intervention, and the Cardinal said that outsiders shouldn't take us for fools. We will get around to doing this. We will take care of these problems. But he also warns the government that the only way to avoid this foreign intervention, which he condemns, is by speedily implementing the LLRC recommendation for an independent inquiry into allegations of crimes committed during the war, to resume the dialogue with the TNA at the highest level, and to facilitate such a dialogue by having a civilian governor in this new period, which is a post-election period. And I think those are eminently sensible and reasonable propositions. The note of urgency in what the Cardinal said is something that should be taken seriously by the government.
Mm-hmm. So a civilian governor for the Northern Province is an essential change that the province needs. And do you think that that change would also help in the matter for the Tamil National Alliance and the Northern Provincial Council?